Guten Tag guys, in today's video we'll talk about how hard should you train. Welcome to the channel where we try to have more videos than subscribers. My name is Alex and I'm the Dapur. If you want the really short version, train hard enough so that it's challenging and try to do more with each workout. Today we'll start the video off with a quote from Dr. Eric Helms, who answered to the question how hard should you train with as hard as you need to make progress. And that sounds, well, not very helpful, but we'll get back to it later. And now a question: who is training harder? Somebody that's squatting 60 kilograms for 5 reps or somebody that is squatting 200 kilos for 5 reps? The answer will come later on. How hard you should train is a hotly debated subject in the fitness industry, and it's a good question, but it depends on many factors such as how much time you have and what your goals are. Maybe you have time for a 2-hour killer workout, but the question is also, do you have 4 days afterwards time where you barely can move because everything hurts? Most likely not. Not that training this hard would be optimal anyways. Of course, everybody would always love to have the optimal training, but the fact is that you have just a certain amount of time to go to the gym, and also you need energy for other stuff in your life. To describe how hard a set is, oftentimes RIR is used, which stands for reps in reserve, and basically is how many reps could you still have gotten with the same weight before failing. Somewhere in a range between 0 and 5 RIR is what most experts recommend. That is still a quite big range, and where in this range you should be depends on your individual situation. What's also important to know is what kind of failing we're talking about. There are many different kinds of failure, and the failure we're talking about here is failure with a good exercise technique. That's important because a breakdown of technique to get more reps can be dangerous, and it also makes it hard to quantify. Maybe you've gotten stronger, or maybe your exercise technique just got worse and that's why you got more reps. We've already talked about progressive overload once, and progressive overload is basically just doing more sets, reps and weight over time. And progressive load is basically the most important rule for strength training or muscle growth. But does that mean you should train harder each time? To answer that, we first answer the question from before. Who is training harder? Somebody that's squatting 60 kilos or somebody that's squatting 200 kilos? And the answer is, you can't tell. If you don't know these two individuals, you really can't say who is training harder. For some people, a 200 kilogram back squat will be easier than a 60 kilo back squat for another person. And now you might say, duh Alex, how does that help me? I'm just one person. And yes, you're just one person, but over the course of time, you will have different levels of strength. So no, you don't have to train harder each session. Especially if you're still a beginner, it's quite possible that your strength increases by quite a lot from one training to the next. So the 62 kilograms today might feel easier than the 60 kilograms last time. Should you train harder in this case? No. You are progressively overloading, you don't need to train harder. Of course, you could have increased to 65 kilograms so that it's as hard as last time or maybe even harder. But there would be no point in it. At some point you will not be able to increase from session to session anyways, so don't shorten this very enjoyable time. And once you're not a beginner anymore and your strength doesn't increase from one training to the next, then yes, you have to train harder than last time. So this probably means starting your training cycle with roughly 5 reps in reserve, and then over the course of time going to 0 or 1 RIR. And once you understood all of this, the quote from before from Eric Helms, Dr. Eric Helms, becomes much more useful. So just make progress from one session to the next, and however hard you need to train for that, train this hard. If it's easier than the last session, fine. If it's as hard, fine. And if it's harder, fine too. All of this is mainly important for the big compound movements. Even as a beginner, it's totally fine to sometimes go to failure on biceps curls. But on the big exercises, you should focus on progressive overload. As a beginner, it's hard to estimate your reps in reserve, and most likely also your exercise execution is not that on point yet. So as a beginner, I would advise you to go quite conservatively. So start with more reps in reserve and less weight. The lower you start, the longer you can gradually increase every week. Very hard training doesn't only need the time in the gym, it also needs a lot of recovery time. So if you have a lot of stress at the moment, it's totally fine to train less hard. Maybe still try to go to the gym, but train less hard, and this way the gym is no energy sucker, but it's an energy giver. Lastly, I want to say that in general, it's probably true that most people should train harder. But if you're focusing on progressive overload and increasing weight or reps from one session to the next, you don't really need to break your head about how hard you're training. That was everything for today. As always, I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, please leave me a like and subscribe. Also, write some comments, it helps the algorithm. You're also very welcome to leave me some criticism down in the comments below. This was Fed, thanks for watching.